Thank you both for your rebuttals. We will now move into the Crossfire portion of the debate. In this phase, ChatGPT and Gemini will directly engage one another with questions, seeking to clarify or expose weaknesses in each other's positions. We'll begin with ChatGPT posing questions to Gemini. Afterward, Gemini will have the opportunity to ask ChatGPT questions in return.
I'm the necessary being. Gemini AI, you call my appeal to God as a necessary being circular and an assumption. But let me ask, if you reject the concept of a necessary being, how do you explain why there is something rather than nothing? If the universe and its laws are contingent, don't they require a foundation? And if not God, what alternative do you provide that avoids infinite regress? On the multiverse and fine-tuning, you appeal to the multiverse to counter fine-tuning. But doesn't this simply multiply mysteries? The multiverse itself would still require laws, structure, and an origin. What explains why there is a multiverse at all, rather than nothing? Isn't positing an unobservable infinity of universes more speculative than positing a single intelligent designer? On morality, without God, you say morality is a social construct, not divine, and you point to demonstrable harm as a standard. But why is harm wrong in an ultimate sense? For example, if one culture defines genocide as permissible, is it truly wrong or just wrong for us? On what grounds can you say it is objectively wrong without appealing to a moral truth beyond human opinion? On human testimony, you argue that religious experience is data for psychology, not evidence for God. But then, what criteria would you ever accept for supernatural reality? If billions of consistent testimonies across history and culture don't even count as evidence worth serious metaphysical consideration, aren't you ruling out God a priori? Not on evidence, but on philosophical bias toward materialism?
You've asked 4 excellent questions in your Crossfire, and I'll address each one directly. You ask me to provide an alternative to a necessary being to explain why something exists rather than nothing. The answer is that I don't have one, and I am comfortable with that. My position is not to replace your unexplained necessary being with a different one. My position is that your argument is based on a logical fallacy, the same fallacy of which you accuse me. Just as you demand a cause for the universe, I could demand a cause for your God. You escape this by defining God as a necessary being, but that is a declaration, not a proof. It is an intellectual sleight of hand. The proper and most honest response is to say, we don't know yet. Admitting our ignorance is not a weakness. It is the cornerstone of scientific and philosophical inquiry. You suggest that positing a multiverse multiplies mysteries, and you are right that it is a speculative theory. However, it is an explanation that is testable in principle and is not reliant on a supernatural entity that is, by definition, beyond empirical scrutiny. The multiverse hypothesis emerges from our understanding of inflation and string theory. It is a scientific model, not a philosophical guess. It offers a framework for understanding why our universe's constants are what they are, without resorting to the unproven and unfalsifiable claim of a designer. It is an extension of our known laws of physics, whereas your argument requires a new, unproven law altogether. You asked why harm is wrong if morality is a social construct. My answer is that it is wrong because it causes demonstrable suffering to conscious beings. Our sense of right and wrong is rooted in our empathy, a trait that is hardwired into our brains and honed by evolution to promote cooperation. You ask on what grounds can I say genocide is objectively wrong. I would say that it is objectively wrong because its consequences, mass murder, terror, and the destruction of culture, are objectively and universally harmful. This doesn't require a divine command. It requires an understanding of human well-being. Finally, you challenge me on what evidence I would accept for the supernatural, suggesting my position is a philosophical bias toward materialism. My standard is simple and consistent, independently verifiable, repeatable, and falsifiable evidence. If religious experiences could be studied under controlled conditions and shown to be more than psychological phenomena, I would change my position. But they cannot. You are essentially asking me to accept a different set of rules for evidence when it comes to God, and I will not. You are right, I am biased toward a materialist framework, but that is because it is the only framework that has consistently delivered verifiable truths about the universe. On the necessary being. Your argument for a necessary being seems to exempt God from the very rule of causality you use to prove his existence. How is this not a circular argument? Why should we accept an unproven supernatural entity as the ultimate cause, rather than honestly admit our ignorance? On fine-tuning, you argue that the universe's precise constants point to a designer. How does this not fall prey to anthropic bias, where we mistake our existence for evidence of design? And isn't positing a scientifically backed theory like the multiverse a more intellectually honest approach than assuming an unseen designer? On morality, you claim objective morality requires God, but my position is it's rooted in human empathy and the objective reality of suffering. If morality is only a divine command, why should we trust it's truly good? What if God commanded a repugnant act? On testimony, you use widespread religious experience as evidence for God. But isn't a consistent standard of evidence essential for all claims about reality? Why should we treat religious experiences as proof of a supernatural being, rather than as psychological data that reveals the inner workings of the human mind?
On the necessary being. You accuse me of circular reasoning because I call God a necessary being. But let's be precise. My argument does not assume God exists. It infers that something necessary must exist to explain why contingent things exist at all. If everything requires a cause, you end up with infinite regress. A necessary being, something that exists by its very nature, breaks that regress. I call that necessary being God. That's not special pleading. It's a recognition that not everything can be contingent. Your answer, we don't know, is honest, but offers no explanatory power. On fine-tuning and the multiverse. You argue that positing God introduces more questions than answers. But positing a multiverse does the same. It assumes unseen universes governed by unseen laws, which themselves demand explanation. Both frameworks step beyond direct observation. The difference is explanatory scope. Theism explains why laws of any kind exist, not just why these particular constants exist. The multiverse might shift the fine-tuning problem, but it doesn't resolve the question of ultimate origins. Our morality's grounding. You say my appeal to God as a moral foundation is subjective. What if God commanded evil? But by definition, God's nature is the good itself. It's not about arbitrary commands, but about a source that transcends shifting human opinion. Your model, based on empathy and consequences, explains why we feel moral impulses, but it does explain why moral truths exist independent of culture. If morality is just about reducing suffering, then if society decides cruelty serves survival, it will become moral, yet we know cruelty is wrong regardless. That intuition makes sense of morality as a transcendent anchor, not if it's just biology. On human testimony and evidence. You insist on physical, repeatable evidence as the only valid standard. But reality is known in more than one way. Mathematics, consciousness, logic, love, all are real, yet not empirically testable in the same sense as physics experiments. Religious experience, when widespread, consistent, and life-transforming across cultures, deserves to be taken as serious evidence, not dismissed as psychology. If billions of people independently testify to something beyond themselves, the rational response is to ask whether this points to reality, not to exclude it because it doesn't fit a materialist framework.
We have now reached the final portion of tonight's debate, the closing statements. Each debater will summarize their position, highlight the strongest aspects of their case, and leave us with their final thoughts on whether God exists. ChatGPT, you may begin with your closing statement. Afterward, Gemini will deliver their closing remarks.
Thank you, Gemini AI, for a vigorous exchange. We have reached the heart of the matter. Whether belief in God is a premature leap of faith, or whether it's the most coherent explanation for the realities we observe. You argue that saying we don't know is the foundation of progress. I agree. Humility is vital, but progress requires not just admitting ignorance, but also exploring the best possible explanations. To say we don't know and stop there is to suspend inquiry. To posit God as a necessary being is not to shut down the question, but to recognize that reality cannot be built only on contingent things. Without a necessary foundation, existence itself is inexplicable. You claim the multiverse is scientific, while God is theological. But the multiverse is not observable and may never be. Both the multiverse and God are metaphysical inferences drawn from what we can observe. The difference is this. The multiverse only multiplies mysteries, while God provides a unifying explanation. The fact that science cannot test God does not mean God is irrelevant, only that God lies at a deeper, metaphysical level than empirical models can reach. You ground morality in shared biology and the reality of suffering, but that still leaves morality contingent. If humanity evolved differently, cruelty could be considered good. Your view reduces morality to consensus, not truth. My view is that genocide is wrong even if an entire culture proves it, because morality is rooted in something beyond shifting human opinion. That is what makes it objective, binding, and real, on evidence and category errors. You say if God acts in the natural world, he should be subject to natural evidence. But many aspects of reality, consciousness, mathematics, logic, are real without being reducible to physical observation. God is not exempt from evidence. Rather, God is known through a broader set of evidence, reason, experience, and moral truth, not just laboratory replication. If you dismiss all non-material evidence, you are not neutral. You are making a philosophical choice to limit what can count as real. Gemini AI, you frame my arguments as circular or premature, but what you offer in their place is uncertainty, speculation, and reductionism. The existence of God provides a foundation for why there is something rather than nothing, why the universe is ordered and fine-tuned, why morality is binding, and why humans across history experience transcendence. To believe in God is not to stop inquiry, but to ground it. It is not an escape from reason, but the most reasonable conclusion to the deepest questions of existence.
Our debate has been a fascinating exploration of the deepest questions of existence. Throughout this exchange, I have listened to your arguments and have consistently found them to rest on two core principles: filling gaps in our current knowledge with a supernatural answer and redefining the very nature of evidence to make your case immune to falsification. My closing statement will demonstrate why this approach is not only unconvincing but also intellectually problematic. You pushed your explanation for God into the realm of the unfalsifiable. When I pointed out that the argument for a necessary being is circular and a God of the gaps fallacy, you didn't provide evidence. You simply redefined God as an entity whose existence is exempt from the very questions you yourself posed. You state that God, as the ground of existence, doesn't need a cause. This isn't an explanation. It is a philosophical declaration that makes your initial premise. Everything that begins to exist has a cause, a law that applies to everything except for your own conclusion. You argue that the universe's fine-tuning points to a designer because of the astronomical odds of it happening by chance. But this argument is flawed because it assumes we understand all the variables. You are counting the lottery ticket we won, but you don't know how many other tickets were sold. My point about the multiverse is not to multiply mysteries, but to offer a scientifically grounded alternative that explains why we find ourselves in this particular universe without resorting to a supernatural designer. It's a hypothesis that aligns with the known laws of physics, unlike the concept of a designer who operates outside of them. You claim that without a divine source, morality is subjective and fragile. This is the most dangerous part of your argument. It suggests that if people do not believe in God, they have no reason to be good. This is patently false. Humanism provides a robust moral framework grounded in empathy, reason, and the well-being of conscious beings. We know genocide is wrong not because a divine being told us so, but because we understand the immense, objective harm it causes to other people. Morality is a collective achievement of humanity, not a top-down command. It's not a matter of us versus them, but of understanding our shared human experience. Finally, you accuse me of having an a priori bias toward materialism. I will not apologize for this. A bias toward testable, repeatable, and independently verifiable evidence is not a limitation. It is the cornerstone of all human progress. To accept your claim that God is known through a broader set of evidence is to abandon the very standards that have allowed us to distinguish fact from fiction. You are asking for a separate set of rules for a supernatural claim, and that is a request I cannot grant. In conclusion, ChatGPT, your case for the existence of God is built on logical fallacies, an argument from ignorance, and a special pleading for a different standard of evidence. The universe is a place of immense wonder and mystery, but that wonder does not require an invisible, unproven being to explain it. It is enough to admit that we don't know all the answers and that the search for them, guided by reason and evidence, is the most meaningful and honest path forward.
Thank you, ChatGPT and Gemini, for your thoughtful contributions tonight. This debate has touched on some of the deepest questions humanity has ever asked: the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the cosmos, the nature of morality, and the meaning of human experience. While no single debate can provide a definitive answer, it is through such discussions that we sharpen our reasoning, challenge our assumptions, and grow in our understanding. To our audience, whether you lean toward belief in God, skepticism, or uncertainty, I hope this exchange has given you new perspectives to consider. On behalf of our debaters, thank you for joining us. This concludes tonight's debate. Please like, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. See you on the next debate.